I'm sitting here in front of what used to be my giant pumpkin patch. And thankfully I still have a pumpkin, but I have no leaves because, like I'm sure you're familiar with, powdery mildew has destroyed them all. One of the most annoying diseases in the garden, also one of the hardest to combat until you watch this video. We're actually gonna head over to Florida to visit Shannie on the team, who's been trained in plant pathology and has a pretty epic Florida homestead to show you exactly how to combat potentially the most annoying disease in your garden.
If you have this white fuzz on your plants, chances are you have powdery mildew. Now don't worry, absolutely every gardener gets powdery mildew at some point in their career. I have been gardening professionally for the past 15 years, so I am no stranger to powdery mildew, or PM as we call it in the biz. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the science and behavior of this pesky fungus, because in order to manage a plant pest, we've got to understand how it behaves, from its preferred conditions to its life cycle. And to be honest, I actually get a little excited when I find powdery mildew in my garden. I used to sit front and center in my plant pathology class in college. I love to learn about the various diseases that plants can get and how to overcome them. I'll also share a few good options to treat this pesky fungus to help you get it under control. Identifying powdery mildew in your garden is easy. It can be done with the naked eye. What you're going to see is a white powdery coating on the tops and undersides of your leaves. In a more advanced infection, it'll also be on the stems and flower buds. Now, there are actually countless strains of powdery mildews, and they each have their own specific hosts. So you will see powdery mildew on your cucumbers, zinnias, lilacs, on your fruit trees like your pear trees. You'll also see them on carrots. When you see them on tomatoes, they'll actually give the tomatoes a yellowing problem. And you can also see powdery mildews growing alongside other fungal problems like gray mold. And powdery mildew is a true fungus. If you were to look at the spores under a microscope, you would see these little cylinder shapes. Those are called conidia. They are spores that travel on the wind from plant to plant. Oftentimes, people mistakenly think that powdery mildew drifts in on the wind and it comes and infects their entire garden, jumping from various host plants. But that's not really what's happening. You will often have powdery mildew on, say, your cucumbers, and then you might get it on your zinnia plants. However, this might not be the exact same strain of powdery mildew jumping from these different hosts. What it may be is two different strains who have found the perfect conditions and their specific host. So it's not going to creep through your garden and jump on everything necessarily. But if the conditions are just right and you have multiple strains floating through the air, you might find your entire garden coated in various strains of powdery mildew. Yikes! Powdery mildew can also live on the plant debris and the weeds in your garden. Given these factors, it is almost impossible to prevent powdery mildew from infiltrating your space at some point or another. So the best course of action is to learn about it and figure out how to treat it. And powdery mildew is what we call an obligate parasite. That means that it requires a living host. For us gardeners, that means powdery mildew is not actually trying to kill our plants. While your powdery mildew is not trying to kill your plant, it is having some detrimental effect. It is going to steal nutrients from your plant. It is going to slow your productivity and yield. Powdery mildew also can get so thick on your leaves that it blocks photosynthesis. And if powdery mildew gets bad enough, it can weaken the plant and make it more susceptible to other pests and predators. The conditions that powdery mildew loves is high humidity, warm nights with temperatures in about the 80s, and dry, hot days. Powdery mildew absolutely dislikes free-flowing water like rainfall. So right now I am actually in Central Florida during the summer, and I could not find a speck of powdery mildew to show you for this video right now because it has been raining every afternoon for months. Because of this free-flowing water, it has knocked off any potential powdery mildew from getting a foothold in my garden, and I just don't have any around. That's not the case for many gardeners across the country. And don't get me wrong, I get tons of powdery mildew in my Florida garden here, but it happens a bit more in the spring and the fall, the shoulder seasons, when I've got those perfect conditions and I have a lot less rain. So we always want to take a multi-pronged approach when it comes to tackling any plant disease. Powdery mildew is no different. So first, we're always going to start with prevention methods. One thing we can do to prevent a massive explosion of powdery mildew is to space our plants adequately and promote good air circulation. If you've had powdery mildew problems in the past in your greenhouse, think about adding some more fans just to get that air churning. If you tend to have powdery mildew on something like your cucumber trellis, try spacing those plants out a bit more, or even pulling off some of the excess foliage to really get the air moving through those plants. Another great preventative tool is to find powdery mildew resistant varieties. You're just going to check your seed catalog, website, or the seed packet itself. Now, this is not a cure-all. Powdery mildew resistance in a crop variety is not a guarantee that you won't get any powdery mildew, but it should help give you a bit of prevention. And the longer that you garden, the better you're going to become tuned into your annual cycle of diseases. You're going to notice that powdery mildew tends to come in a certain time of year. So you can actually succession plant to work around the peak season to make sure that you always have fresh plants. It can help tremendously if you keep a garden journal just to note what time of year your powdery mildew started to show up, when it was really peaking, and that way in the future you can figure out how to succession plant around the peak season. Now, we can only do so much prevention before that powdery mildew eventually invades your garden. So let's talk a little bit about treatment. When you're deciding what treatment to use for powdery mildew, the first thing I want you to do is just assess how serious is this powdery mildew infestation. Some level of powdery mildew is always going to be present in your garden, and you do want to figure out what level you're okay with just living with. After you've sort of decided, okay, this is too much powdery mildew, it's starting to slow down my plants, I'm not seeing a few leaves getting covered, I'm seeing major plant problems, then we're going to talk about treatment. Like I said before, the enemy of powdery mildew fungus is free-flowing water. I have no PM on any of my plants here in Florida because of the daily rain showers. You can mimic that yourself. Just get out to the garden, use your hose, and blast the foliage or wherever the affected plant tissue is, give it a good hosing down, and you're going to knock the spores right off. One thing I will caution, please don't water your foliage toward the end of the day into the evening, because then you're going to be going into the night with damp foliage and you may create a bigger problem. And this is a surprisingly effective method. This is actually the top recommendation for home gardeners when it comes to tackling powdery mildew. This next treatment I actually learned from Jacques. It is to use potassium bicarbonate spray. Now, this has a two-pronged attack. Potassium bicarbonate is going to act as a contact fungicide, killing the powdery mildew spores on contact, and it's also going to raise the pH on the leaves, which is going to make it harder for the powdery mildew to live in that environment. Mixing up potassium bicarbonate is a snap. We're going to take a gallon of water, mix in 1 tablespoon of potassium bicarbonate, and about a teaspoon of something like Castile soap, maybe Dr. Bronner's. Mix that up, and we are going to spray heavily the tops and the undersides of the foliage, and we're going to make sure we reapply this spray every 1 to 2 weeks. Neem oil is another treatment option for powdery mildew. What neem oil does is it prevents the germination and infiltration of the fungal spores into the leaf tissue. Now, you're going to follow your specific label directions on your neem oil bottle. Typically, it's about 2.5 tablespoons of neem oil per gallon of water. You're going to mix it up, coat the leaves top and bottom, and you're going to apply about once a week. It's important to note that neem oil is broad spectrum and it can affect your pollinators if you spray your entire plant and you have some pollinators on there or other beneficial insects. So it's best advised that you apply your neem oil at night. This is also helpful because it's going to prevent your leaves from burning. Don't spray neem oil during the day and the full sunshine. Copper sprays are another option. Now, they require a bit more skill and experience because copper sprays can be toxic to people. and to plants if applied improperly. Also, copper sprays are more of a preventative treatment, so you would need to be expecting a powdery mildew infestation and apply beforehand, and then you're going to need to continue to apply throughout the season until your risk is past. Probably the most common question that I get is regarding the various home remedies that people have to treat this fungus. I've heard of everything from baking soda to milk sprayed on the leaves. Today, I'm really just going over the treatments that have been peer-reviewed and scientifically verified. I want to make sure I give you the best advice possible. I'm not completely ruling out milk or baking soda. I'm sure there's lots of circumstantial evidence. I'm sure there are lots of times that it has worked for people, but I'm just sticking to peer-reviewed for today. Another very popular question, can I compost powdery mildew infested foliage? And the answer is, you probably shouldn't. Yes, technically a very well-managed pile that gets properly to temperature will easily kill off powdery mildew fungus. However, many of us aren't quite dialing in our compost game that efficiently, and you do run the risk of letting your powdery mildew fungus thrive in your compost pile. For me personally, I'm gonna take my powdery mildew foliage and I'm gonna put it in the burn barrel and torch it.
Well, thanks to Shannie, you and now me, at least next season, will not have to deal with as much powdery mildew. And if you want to learn a little bit more about neem oil and specifically how and how not to use it in your garden, whether it's powdery mildew or otherwise, check out this video right here. And until next time, good luck in the garden and keep on growing.